of ours who passed away last November. Margaret Watson got in touch with me last spring. She's always been a wealth of ideas for programs, and she said, we need to get a conversation together about affordable housing. Let's put a panel together. Her health then took a turn for the worse, and she was unable to see this project through. But I was persuaded that this was something that needed to happen. So this is happening in part in memory of Margaret Watson, who was a former president of United Methodist Women, a longtime Wachusett Regional School Committee member, a humanities professor, and the academic dean of students at Quinsigamond Community College. And so this is partly put on in her memory. I'm really delighted today to introduce our speakers who will be part of our panel discussion. And the first person really doesn't need much introduction, but I will give you his quick bio nonetheless. At Augustus, the Secretary of the Massachusetts Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities was appointed by Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey in June of 2023 to lead the newly created Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities. An experienced, results-driven executive, Augustus has spent more than 35 years in public service, building effective teams and bringing people together to have a positive impact on communities. As the Secretary of the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, Augustus leads the state's mission to create more homes and lower housing costs for Massachusetts residents. The Executive Office also distributes funding for community development initiatives, oversees the state's public housing, and operates the homelessness prevention and housing stabilization programs. Before joining the Healey-Driscoll administration, Augustus served as city manager right here in Worcester, where he led the state's second largest city through a revitalization that became known as the Worcester Renaissance. Under his administration, our gateway city has seen a wave of new development, infrastructure improvements, and new housing that has attracted statewide attention and restored pride to residents. As city manager, Augustus also spearheaded the $240 million landmark redevelopment of Worcester's Canal District and Kelly Square, including leading negotiations to relocate the Boston Red Sox AAA affiliate, proudly known as the Woo Sox, to the city, and construction of the multi-use Polar Park Stadium. Before joining the city of Worcester, Augustus served as Director of Government and Community Relations for the College of Holy Cross, State Senator for the 2nd Worcester District, Chief of Staff for Congressman Jim McGovern, and Chief of Staff to the Assistant Secretary for Intergovernmental and Interagency Affairs at the U.S. Department of Education under President Clinton's administration. Also with us today is Peter Dunn, who serves as the Chief Development Officer for the City of Worcester. The Executive Office of Economic Development has several divisions, including business development, housing development, neighborhood development, workforce development, cultural development, just a few things, planning and regulatory services, as well as special projects. Over the last few years, Peter and the city's housing team have launched many new programs and public policy initiatives to help respond to the growing housing crisis, and I look forward to hearing more about that shortly. Also with us today is Jack Moran, who is the data analyst for the Central Mass Housing Alliance. After a successful career in healthcare information management, leading Aetna Health's electronic data interchange team to a steady state, Jack learned of the overwhelming need in the nonprofit homeless sector. He joined Central Mass Housing Alliance Homeless Management Information Systems team, where he has project managed the implementation of information systems required by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development and the state of Massachusetts. He serves on multiple committees, including the City of Worcester's Housing First Coordinating Council, the Management Committee for the State of Massachusetts State Homeless Data Warehouse. As COVID-19 emergency unfolded, Jack project managed rapid deployment of remote communication technologies that enabled Central Mass Housing Alliance staff to continue to collaborate effectively throughout the emergency. Jack was recognized by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development's SNAPS Office and the Centers for Disease Control for a best practice in development of a vaccine status assessment which used track vaccination status of clients throughout the COVID-19 emergency. Using ARPA funds, Jack oversaw implementation of high-speed internet and wireless internet services in all of Central Mass Housing Alliance's family shelter operations in order to support remote learning during COVID for students living in the shelters. Reporting developed by Jack is used by municipal, legislative, and agency leaders throughout the region to inform policymaking. Jack is currently working hands-on, helping to maximize EA shelter capacity during the current crisis. He serves as commissioner for his local housing authority in Townsend, Mass., where he lives with his lovely wife Eileen, sons Brendan and Nicholas, 2 cats, and a hound dog. Closing out our panelists today is Debbie Maruca Hoak. Debbie is a native of Worcester and stands as a strategic nonprofit leader with a career spanning over 25 years of progressive management history. With extensive experience in both for-profit and nonprofit sectors, Debbie has consistently demonstrated a commitment to excellence in organizational leadership. In 1994, Debbie's journey with Habitat for Humanity began, marking the inception of a dedicated and enduring partnership. Since taking on the role of executive director at Habitat for Humanity MetroWest, Greater Worcester, in 2018, Debbie has exemplified exceptional leadership, guiding the organization towards new heights of success. Her unwavering dedication to Habitat for Humanity's mission underscores a profound commitment to community betterment and affordable housing solutions. A great thanks to all of our panelists today. And Ed, we'll begin with you. Thank you. You can talk wherever you want. You could start there and come down or whatever you wish.
As long as folks can hear me, I'll just maybe stay here and then be easier to pass the mic down. Well, thank you for inviting me, Allison. Thank you for putting this program together, and thank you all for being here and learning a little bit more about what the governor has really called the most pressing issue facing the state, which is the issue of housing, particularly affordable housing. She created the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities back on June 1st, and that was the day I started as the secretary. Folks may or may not remember that Massachusetts hadn't had a housing secretary for about 30 years. Housing at the state level was combined with economic development. That happened at the end of the Dukakis administration. That's the way it existed for the next 30 years. But given the crisis that Massachusetts is in around housing, she and the legislature thought that it made sense to have somebody focus specifically on housing and housing production, housing preservation, and here I am. The charge was to come up with a plan that could move the needle on housing production. How do we jumpstart more production? The challenge right now, Massachusetts has about a 1.7% vacancy rate. That's the lowest vacancy rate in the country. A healthy housing ecosystem is somewhere between 4 and 5%. And what does that mean? It means that basically everybody who's looking for housing is at a real disadvantage. The power dynamic, if you will, in the housing space is out of whack. If you're trying to buy a home for the first time and you go to an open house and you put an offer in, almost every single time it goes for over asking, multiples above the asking price. Same thing with the rental market. The rental market has become so tight, particularly in some of our cities and particularly in the eastern part of the state, that literally folks are getting into bidding wars for rental apartments as well. And if you're somebody who's on a really tight income, you need to be close to where your work is, and don't have the ability to continue to look, you're at a huge disadvantage. And the power dynamic is really upside down, and that is really a supply and demand issue. And so we're really focused on trying to expand the supply of housing. You all have been reading, I assume, about the emergency assistance shelter crisis that we have here in Massachusetts. We have about 7,500 families in that system, or about 25,000 people. They're spread out over multiple cities and towns throughout Massachusetts, including here in the city of Worcester. And those folks, the goal is obviously to move them out of shelter as quickly as possible to permanent homes. That's where they want to be, that's where the state would want them to be, so that they can get on with their lives and do all the things that anybody else would want to do. About 55% of the families who are in the emergency assistance shelter are longtime Massachusetts families. They're folks who've been here their entire lives. About 45% are new arrivals, folks who are coming predominantly from Haiti and Venezuela. Those are the two biggest locations where people are coming to Massachusetts. And if you've been reading in the news, particularly in Haiti in the last few days, it's virtually a failed government there. No police presence, no military, armed gangs controlling many parts of the island. And folks are doing what anybody would do if they thought their children or their grandchildren were in danger. They flee for safety and try to find a better life somewhere else. And Massachusetts is a right to shelter state, and so many folks come here, and we do the best we can. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me put it. I was just saying that, you know, the right to shelter state that we are, we try to make sure that in short order that when somebody presents, often that's in one of our regional offices for longtime Massachusetts families or through Logan Airport. That's how a lot of folks come here from other parts of the world. And then we have a welcome center where we try to do an evaluation, find out who may have particularly challenging and urgent needs. We've got a lot of pregnant moms, infants, others, and we try to prioritize them for placement. The challenge is moving people out of the shelter system into permanent housing given the short supply that I just talked about, that really tight vacancy rate. Which is just another indication of the urgency of the work. So what we came up with is something that turned into the Affordable Homes Act, which the governor filed back in October. It's a $4.1 billion investment in many of the programs that we use to create affordable housing. Things like the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, where we're planning on doubling the amount of money in that trust fund. And we use that to subsidize the creation of affordable units. Again, if you're thinking about a developer who might build market rate housing, they're counting on the income for the rents to cover the cost of building the housing and everything that goes into that, buying the land, designing the project, going through all the financing phases, and ultimately building and managing the project after. If you want to have affordable units that aren't at the market rate, that's where the Commonwealth comes in, and the city of Worcester has a number of programs, and I'll leave that to Peter to talk about, that try to support that as well, kind of subsidizing some of those units so that they don't have to get the market rate, they can get something less than the market rate, so that folks who aren't able to meet those rents could take advantage of a lower cost unit. We also have a number of policy changes, things like ADUs as of right, and great credit to the city of Worcester for already recently having adopted that. Those are accessory dwelling units where you might have a garage and there's space above a garage that could be turned into a one-bedroom or a studio apartment, maybe a walkout basement that could be converted into a unit housing, a attic, some other space. We think, we've done analysis, we think 8,000 to 10,000 units of new housing could be created in the first 5 years by just removing the barriers to creating accessory dwelling units. California did this a few years ago and saw tens of thousands of new units of housing produced at no cost to the taxpayers. That's individual property owners who decide to make that investment and add those units. We also have a recommendation for something called a transfer fee. When property sells, there's a tax, there's a fee that's assessed on the property. We would allow cities and towns to opt in, so it wouldn't be required of every city and town. If Worcester wanted to do it, they could vote to do it, and they could add a 0.5%, or 1%, or 2% fee on the sale of property above $1 million. So if a property sold for $1.2 million, the $200,000 above the million could be subject to that additional fee. And those dollars would stay in that local community, and they would be used for the production or preservation of affordable housing. So again, it would allow local communities to do what they think makes sense, knowing their communities better, and what a town on the Cape might do, given some of the challenges that they have there, might be a different strategy than Worcester or Pittsfield, but allowing that local control and some local dollars to come in to support those efforts. I was down the Cape not too long ago. Interestingly enough, 50% of the workforce on the Cape now live off the Cape. So think about that. We've got all sorts of climate goals. We want to reduce our carbon emission. But because a lot of the rental housing on Cape Cod has been turned into Airbnbs, because folks can make a lot more money that way, what used to be a rental unit that maybe a DPW worker or a preschool teacher or somebody who worked in a hotel or motel or restaurant on the Cape lived in is now used for Airbnb, different people every weekend or every week during the summer. And those folks have to travel from off the Cape to work. And what ends up happening is a lot of folks can't do that or won't do that, and you have jobs that go unfilled. And so the Cape's economy is really dependent on the travel and tourism, the hotels and the restaurants, and they can't find the workers that can live close to where they need to work. And that really is a danger to the Cape's economy, to the jobs, to the tax base there, and to the municipal workforce. You are counting on somebody making sure the sewer system works and the water system works and the trash gets picked up. Well, people need to have an affordable place to live in order to provide all of those services. So there's a number of policies. There's that $4.1 billion that's in the Affordable Homes Act that coupled with a tax bill the governor signed over the summer that increased some of the tax credits. Two important ones, the low-income housing tax credits, that went from $40 million to $60 million a year, and the HDIP, which Worcester uses quite a bit, that goes only to gateway cities. That went from $10 million to $30 million with a one-time $57 million increase. Those two things combined with the MBTA Communities Law. You've probably been following in the news. The town of Milton is balking at their responsibilities to create zoning within their community that would allow for multifamily housing to be as of right. So basically the town couldn't require special requirements or special permits in order to build that. Many communities have gotten very creative over the years in preventing housing from being built. Sometimes it's because they worry that there's more traffic that would come. Sometimes they worry that more students would be in their school district and they'd have to pay more taxes because they'd have to expand their schools. Most of these things tend not to be true when you actually dig into the facts, but that is often the fear and the reaction many projects encounter when they're proposed. And so under the previous governor, Governor Baker, in the legislature, they passed this MBTA community law that requires 177 communities that has some kind of MBTA service, whether it be commuter rail or the green or red line, or adjacent communities to communities that have that service, to create these zones. It doesn't mean the housing's going to be built right away, but what it does mean is you have to remove the barriers, remove the impediments to housing being built. So we really see the new tax credits, the policy and the dollars in the Affordable Homes Act, and the implementation of the MBTA Communities Act. Those three things together, we really think are going to create an environment where we can do a lot more housing production in Massachusetts. We estimate about 40,000 units of housing can be created in the next 5 years that otherwise would not be created with the Affordable Homes Act, and about another 27,000 units of housing preserved. The last thing I'll say, and I'm probably going too long, but public housing. Massachusetts is the only state in the country that has as much state-owned public housing as we do, 43,000 plus units of state-owned public housing. Much of that housing is tired. A lot of it was built for returning World War II veterans, and it's needed investment. Anything that's 80 plus years old needs investment. And we are recommending in the Affordable Homes Act tripling the amount of money going into public, state-owned housing, capital repairs, roofs, electrifying the units so that we get off the more dirty, non-renewable energy sources, reducing our carbon footprint in our state-owned units, and making sure the units are healthier and cleaner and more dignified, and preserving the units we have. I can't imagine being in the housing crisis if we didn't have those 43,000 units. They often provide a safety net home for a lot of folks who have very, very low incomes, who otherwise wouldn't have a place to live. So I'd urge you, if you're not familiar with the bill, go on our website, check it out. There's a lot of, I think, interesting things to learn there, and look forward to the conversation. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Peter Dunn, the Chief Development Officer for the City of Worcester. The Secretary used to be my boss before he moved on to the state. And we do have, as was introduced, an entire housing development division within our Office of Economic Development. So we also do planning and zoning and business development and a variety of things. But as has been the theme, one of the most pressing issues that we have in front of us is housing. And so we've been really focused and doubled down with our housing development staff to really address the crisis. And so one of the things that we did last year with the City Council, and by extension communicating to the community, was that we know that the housing ecosystem is a pretty complicated and complex ecosystem. And so we do a lot of different things in our office and through municipal government that a lot of people were trying to understand how those things fit together. And so what we did was in 2023, we submitted to the City Council comprehensive housing strategy to help folks understand how our different efforts fit together and create a comprehensive strategy to address all of the different facets within the ecosystem that have been a challenge over the last several years. And so that's organized around 3 pillars, really. The first pillar is housing production, preservation, and healthy homes. So that pillar is really focused on the building stock itself. So how do we grow the supply? As was noted, there's a significant shortage, a supply problem, both on for sale units, folks that are trying to become homeowners, but also available apartments, and housing types as well, whether it's senior housing, ADA accessible housing, affordable housing. We really need more of everything, and that shortage exists. And so one of the things we're trying to do is grow that supply through new production, and then looking at our existing building stock and trying to make sure that we're preserving that and investing in that. We have an old building stock in this city with a lot of deferred maintenance. As costs go up, as there are different challenges that folks face, whether it's homeowners or landlords, they then have less available resources to make those improvements that are necessary to keep up with the maintenance and other things that we're trying to do, like energy efficiency. If we want to take this older building stock and make it more energy efficient and have less of a carbon footprint, that requires investment. So really trying to preserve what we already have. And then the healthy homes aspect as well, again, looking at the existing building stock and making sure that we're abating lead paint. So most of our building stock in the city was built prior to 1970. So there were different things used during that time, like lead paint and asbestos, and other kinds of environmental hazards that we know more about today. And so we try to make sure that we're going into these older homes and getting those environmental hazards out of those homes. As we know, there's links to asthma and other conditions to folks if they have those hazards in their homes. So really that first pillar is all focused on the building stock itself. The second pillar that we have focused on in our strategy is homeowner, tenant, and unhoused assistance. So how do we make sure that we're providing resources and guidance and assistance to homeowners, to renters, as well as our unhoused community? And so we have a number of different programs and resources in order to help each of those stakeholders that are contributors to our overall housing ecosystem. And then the third pillar that we have is really the public policy side of things. And so I think these 3 areas are very analogous to the various things that are part of the Affordable Homes Act that was described. And they're trying to do similar things at the statewide level. And so there's good consistency there. And just some highlights over the last few years that I'll note on public policy. That's something that I think we've done a good job about over just the last few years of trying to be creative about thinking about how zoning and other things affect the housing crisis, and really trying to be proactive in creating new initiatives and public policy measures to break down those barriers or address those challenges that have existed over time. So on zoning, we have a lot of efforts going on with the city's zoning ordinance right now, some of which have been sort of a Band-Aid approach, like trying to do some early action items while we work on a big comprehensive plan for zoning in the city. You may have heard about it. It's called the Worcester Now Next Plan. So over the last 2 years, we've done a lot of community engagement, working with folks from the neighborhoods as well as experts in this area to create a long-range plan for the city of Worcester as it relates to the built environment and zoning. Most communities have one. We have not had an updated one for 40 years, so it's long overdue. And a lot of our zoning, the elements of our zoning ordinance in the city, really dates back to the 60s. There's been various incremental changes to it since the 60s, but it hasn't had a comprehensive overhaul since that time frame. And so what we're hoping to do over the next couple of years is really take an entirely new approach to our zoning ordinance and rewrite it, essentially an overhaul of what exists today, to make sure that as our community grows further over the next several years, that we're guiding that growth and accommodating that growth in the way that we want to see that growth as we move forward. And so a couple of things that we've done as kind of early action items with zoning while that bigger picture is kind of unfolding is first inclusionary zoning. So that started under the secretary and then was wrapped up last year under City Manager Batista. And so inclusionary zoning is a concept that when there's new multifamily projects being built in the city, larger projects, 12 units or more, we're asking for a set aside of a certain number of those units to be affordable housing. So right now, and as exists in many communities, you can build multifamily housing and it might be all market rate, depending on whatever the market is going to bear in terms of the rent for those units. And we're saying if you're building a project of a certain size, we want to make sure that you're setting aside a number of those units at restricted rents, affordable rents for the community. That can be a tricky thing to balance. It's a good policy measure as you think about it, creating more affordable housing through that new requirement, but you want to be also careful about that because it could have an unintended consequence of making housing more challenging to get built as well. When you start to sort of create requirements that affects the economics of a project, now we could be creating even worse problem because we already know that the problem we have is rooted in a lack of supply. And so the more requirements we have or the harder we make it for folks to build that supply, you could actually exacerbate the problem. So it's a great measure that a lot of communities have undertaken in Massachusetts, but when you do create that policy, you want to be really thoughtful and careful about balancing that so that you don't inhibit actually housing production from moving forward. So that's something that I think we came up with a good balance for our community, and that was passed by the City Council last year in 2023. And then most recently in December of 2023, we also worked with the City Council, the Planning Board, and the community to create, as the Secretary mentioned, a framework in our zoning to allow for these accessory dwelling units. So some people refer to them as in-law apartments. We don't really use that characterization because they don't actually have to be related to you. You could create one of these accessory dwelling units and rent it out to somebody that's not related to you. So it doesn't necessarily kind of meet that characterization of an in-law apartment, but that's really what it's designed to do. Is you might have a single family home, maybe you have a basement that you could renovate and create a new living situation. And we feel like two populations this could really benefit in the single family environment is folks that are maybe older, maybe empty nesters, maybe they had their family that grew up in this house, but now the house is bigger than what they need, but they want to age in place and they love their neighborhood and they've been there for so long, but they don't need as much of that space in the primary residence. So maybe they can create this in-law apartment or this accessory dwelling unit and move into that smaller accessory dwelling unit on the property, and maybe their growing family can take over that primary residence, or maybe they could rent it out to somebody else that's not related to them. So we think it's a good tool to help folks age in place in the neighborhood that they've come to love. And then also we think it could have real good benefits for maybe college graduates that can't afford to buy their own home, or certainly rent is a challenge for folks that are just starting to get into their careers and get that stable income. And so when colleges, students that recently graduate might need to move back with their parents, this kind of an accessory dwelling unit could create a different level of independence for them as well. So we think those are two particular areas, but certainly the benefits could definitely resonate with many other populations as well, but those are two areas that are often talked about. And then in terms of the other resources that we've kind of put together, as you might know, the City of Worcester received a large sum of money from the federal government through the American Rescue Plan Act. So that was the pandemic stimulus or pandemic relief federal legislation. And we dedicated about $30 million to housing programs and initiatives. So it's not just about the policy measures, it's also about making sure that we have the resources available to address whether it's housing production or the improvements we need to make in our existing housing stock, or those assistance programs for homeowners or tenants or for the unhoused population. And so through the $30 million that we dedicated to these different housing programs, we created about 8 new programs since 2020. They're listed on our website. And that I would definitely encourage folks to explore those. The single biggest one is that we took about $17 million and created the city's first ever municipal affordable housing trust fund. So similar to what the secretary described, at the state level they have a trust fund. We now at the local level have a trust fund, and basically that's a subsidy that helps us bring down the cost of constructing these new units so that when we put in that investment in partnership with the private sector, we can ask them to cap those rents at an affordable rate. Because otherwise, the cost of construction, the cost of capital right now with interest rates, it costs so much to get new units brought online that you just can't offer affordable rent rates because the project would be upside down. You'd literally be losing money. So this new tool, these resources, the partnership between the public sector and the private sector allows us to subsidize that cost of creating new units and require them to charge affordable rent rates. So that's kind of like just an overview of kind of what we're doing, the strategy that we have, how it kind of fits into the different stakeholders of the housing ecosystem and the different needs that we're seeing as a community. So thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Jack?
Yeah, so I apologize, I'm a data guy, and so I bring a couple of slides with me wherever I go. If folks are able to see the screen, I think I'll talk a little bit about what we have. I don't know if panelists, you want to come down? So I'll just start with a question actually for everybody. How do you feel the economy is working for you right now? How many people here would say it's working well for you? Okay. And how many people would say it's the other way? Okay. An interesting mix. Would any of you be surprised to learn that, well, if I were to ask you what state has the largest concentration of 6-figure incomes? Anybody want to take a guess at what the... Actually, number one's California, but a close second is Massachusetts. Yeah, a little surprising. Some people would be a little surprised to learn that. Over 11% of Massachusetts residents that are employed are earning over 6-figure income currently. So if you look at what industries these folks are working in, the Massachusetts economy is just completely dominated by professional, scientific, and technical services. So these are the STEM professions. If anybody's been in the education field at any point in the last 10 years or so, you've heard the STEM professions that just talked about like a mantra by the educators in the field. These professions are obviously very high-paying professions. And so what we see is that those professions, physicists, chemists, computer scientists, biotechnologists, Massachusetts is turning out professionals in these fields. Worcester Polytechnical Institute right up the street. They have a direct relationship with NASA. I personally have met 3 astronauts on the campus over there not long ago. So it's fantastic. Obviously, it is fantastic, and we want this, right? We welcome this tremendous progress, and Massachusetts is a leader in this field. We wouldn't want it any other way, right? Every other state envies the mix of industries that Massachusetts has. The challenge is these physicists and chemists and biotechnologists, they're sharing a community with people who are stocking the grocery shelves, who are keeping our hospitals sanitized. The bedding has to be changed every day in those hospitals. Our nursing homes have to be staffed 24 hours a day. Even our homeless service agencies, 24/7 staff operates our homeless programs. You know, and folks that work in those fields, they're not achieving a six-figure salary. So once again, when you look at the cost of housing, I think we've already heard plenty about this, but the cost of housing in Massachusetts, when you look at all the states ranked, Massachusetts is in the third position, right behind Hawaii. Well, Hawaii is a tropical island paradise in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, so I think we can exclude that one as an outlier, but number one, again, is California. So it's no surprise that those communities that are presenting with the fastest growing, highest paying professions also tend to be the states where the highest cost of living seems to emerge. We look at those two charts together, we can see that they overlay against each other. It's almost a perfect correlation, right? So there's a report that we refer to frequently, produced by the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. So the National Low-Income Housing Coalition is the one that produced that ranking of the states by the expense ratios. And according to the Massachusetts Low-Income Housing Coalition, a person would need to be earning $86,000 in order to afford market rate two-bedroom apartment. So we've applied a little bit of analysis to the Worcester County community, taking some data from the American Community Survey, and we found that there are over 50,000 households in Worcester County that are currently what's called rent burdened. So rent burden is a term used to describe when a household is spending more than 30% of their income on rent. So those are some fairly alarming numbers, obviously. And as Secretary Augustus referred to earlier, the rental vacancy rate has just absolutely plummeted. You know, Worcester used to be a place that had double-digit vacancy rates. It's a very different set of problems here. At this point, rental vacancy is down about as close to zero as it can get. At the same time, what we've seen is that the cost of housing on the right side is a graph showing that's nearly doubled over the course of the last 8 years. So it's about $2,000 is the going rate for a market rate apartment. The result of that, of course, is some of those households that are rent burdened just can't continue to do it. They become homeless. They enter our homeless system. So I probably should have done a better job of introducing myself earlier, but I'm Jack Moran. I work as a data analyst with Central Mass Housing Alliance. Central Mass Housing Alliance, if you don't know, is a homeless service provider. We're the lead agency for HUD in Worcester County. So this data is just showing a monthly summary of number of folks that have been coming in and making use of our shelter and outreach programming. So we're seeing that number is just about as high as it was last year. And as we see these experiences people have, the episodes of their homelessness, it stretches out in terms of its length of time. So we document the length of time that people stay homeless when they come into our shelter system. And of course, we work with them to try to get them back out into the housing market, get them into an apartment, get them into a situation where their income can be increased. If they qualify for benefits, we work with them to try to help make that happen. That's just getting more and more challenging given the low rental vacancy rate and the extremely high cost of housing. Once folks become homeless, it's just that much more difficult for them to get a foothold back up into the housing market and to be independent. So on the left side, what you're seeing is the average length of time homeless over the course of the last 6 years. That's stretched out. Right now, I think we're at 177 days. And then on the right side, the exits to permanent destinations. We measure this to see how effective we are at achieving that goal of getting people out of shelter into permanent destinations. So at this point, we're actually below 25% effective in terms of that statistic coming out of last year. So we're pretty concerned about that, obviously. When we look at what we think the primary drivers of this are, you know, at the federal level, this is not news. This is something that HUD has reported for a very long time to us. There only been appropriated funding to fund 23% of the qualified low-income housing applicants. So these are folks who would apply for low-income housing at the housing authorities. They qualify. The housing's not available at the housing authority because Congress hasn't appropriated funds for it. So for the folks that do not receive the benefit, they remain on a waiting list. So some of you may have heard about these waiting lists. The Worcester Housing Authority's waiting list, the best information we have is this point is over 12 years long. So if you think about, you know, a mother with a 10-year-old child applying, you know, the child's going to be 22 years old by the time, you know, that comes up. So it's not exactly a situation we would like to see. So in conclusion, you know, we're not seeing that markets produce affordable housing. Markets produce housing that's profitable for the businesses that make it available. The only thing that produces affordable housing for people that don't have enough money to pay for it is a community that takes seriously its moral responsibility to do so. So people become homeless because housing is limited. In our housing market, any available apartment goes to the highest bidder. So from any angle of the homeless system, the cause, the cure, and all indications point to the need for housing for people that don't have the ability to pay for it on their own. A meaningful program of abundant, affordable housing is a moral imperative, requires cooperation and leadership from every level, local, state, and especially federal.
Hi everyone, I'm Debbie Maruca, Hoak. I'm the Executive Director of Habitat for Humanity in Worcester. Can you hear me? All right, I'll hold it a little bit closer. Sorry about that. I'm Debbie Maruca, Hoak, and I'm the Executive Director of Habitat for Humanity in Worcester. And we've just heard a lot of information, a lot of statistics, and a lot of policy information about affordable housing. But Peter shared an article with me recently about how difficult it is to visualize the need for affordable housing and what it means. And I have a friend who shared a story with me recently that really helps to paint that picture. So my friend lives in another town in Massachusetts, and she went to CVS Pharmacy to pick up a prescription recently. And when she got there, there was a long line. And so she got in line with everyone else and had a conversation with an older woman in front of her. The woman was named Barbara. And Barbara was mentioning that the line at the CVS Pharmacy had been really long, for a really long time, because CVS wasn't able to find qualified pharmacy techs to work there. And as they continued talking, Barbara asked my friend where she worked, and my friend said she worked for Habitat for Humanity. And Barbara said, oh, I know Habitat, I know what they do, but not really a fan of affordable housing projects. They continued to talk, and Barbara mentioned how much she was missing her children and her grandchildren because they'd had to move out of state a number of months ago in order to find a house that they could afford. And what Barbara didn't understand is that all of these things were the same problem. Having affordable housing in our communities allows the pharmacy techs to live nearby, which allows you to wait less time in line because the services that we need have the staff living locally to provide those services. And even though Barbara was able to afford her home decades ago when she bought it and she was able to raise her children there, now that her children are grown and have children of their own, they can't afford to live in that same town. And so rather than seeing her grandchildren every Sunday for dinner, Barbara can see them on holidays and special occasions. And Habitat, our focus is on affordable home ownership, which is one tool in one of the pillars that Peter talked about. There's a continuum of housing, and in order for our communities to thrive, people need to have the choice to live where they want to live and in what type of housing, and what works for them and their families at the time. So sometimes the right choice, is a rental apartment for a family. And sometimes it's single-family home ownership. And sometimes it's a duplex or a multi-unit home. But if we don't have these choices within our communities, then none of our communities thrive. So my Habitat affiliate, the one here in Worcester, is one of the first that formed in the state of Massachusetts, and we've been building here since 1985. Since that time, across the state of Massachusetts, Habitat affiliates have helped more than 1,000 families through both home ownership and home preservation, affordable home repairs, and ability to stay in those homes. Allison asked me to provide some examples of things that are happening right now that Habitat is doing that can help impact this problem. So in Worcester right now, we have 10 homes under construction. In every stage from just about to close on a mortgage to just about to put a shovel in the ground as soon as it thaws enough. And when Habitat sells a home, well, when we build a home, it costs about $450,000 to $500,000 to build a single-family home in our area right now. When we sell the home, in order to make it affordable for the families that we're working with, we sell them for an average just under $200,000. So there's a gap on every single home that we build that we need to fill. We need to span that $300,000 on every single home. And so the policies that are being put in place at the city and the state level to provide that funding, those numbers sound really large. But when it comes down to the number of units that can be created, even with an organization like Habitat, where we work with our technical schools to help reduce our costs, and the students come out to do our builds, and we work with volunteers, and each of those things that we do helps to reduce the cash outlay that we need to provide in order to build our homes. And there's still such a significant gap in order to make sure that those homes are affordable for the families that we're serving. So the policies, the voting, the approvals for inclusionary zoning and accessory dwelling units, these are the things that are going to make it so that when you go to CVS, you don't have to wait in long lines in order to get your prescription filled, and so that your children and your grandchildren can visit regularly. I have one more story that I'll share, and it's just about the impact of what affordable housing can do generationally for families. So I received a call in January from the daughter of a woman that Habitat had sold a home to back in 1999. And I knew the woman, and I've worked with her for years. And sadly, over the holidays, this homeowner had passed away. And so her daughter called me to say that she remembered working on her home before they moved into it in 1999. And her mother at that time was a single mom, recently widowed, who was working multiple jobs. And the daughter said that she knew that there was no way that she could have lived the quality of life that she lived if Habitat hadn't been there to provide an affordable home for her mother. The daughter was grown, she moved out, she had children of her own, and she still lives here in Massachusetts. And she called me because she wanted Habitat to buy the house back, because she wanted to be sure that somebody else would have the same opportunity to grow up in a safe and stable environment and have that affordable housing that she had. think we're ready for questions.
Thank you so much to our speakers. I'm sure you're all swimming in information, but I know you also came with some questions, and so I'm going to be walking around with the microphone. I will be holding the microphone because we are looking for questions more than statements, please.
Good morning. My name is Joan Perkins. I'm a Worcester resident now. I spent 50 years in Boston. Working in the Longwood medical area, one of the concepts that was frequently mentioned, because there are a lot of transient people doing graduate work in labs, things like that, was single room occupancy. I never see it mentioned when housing's mentioned in Worcester. What's the story with that?
That's a good question. So if anybody didn't hear about single room occupancy, and so when we talk about single room occupancy in Worcester, what we typically refer to are like a boarding house kind of style where folks have a bedroom, but then the other facilities in the building, like the kitchen and the bathroom, are shared. And so one of the things that we've been focused on is really creating either affordable housing, or also one of the big focuses that we have right now is on what we call permanent supportive housing. So these are at the deepest levels of affordability, really trying to get folks out of homelessness, chronic homelessness, into these units, and that it's not just about a roof over their head and being able to just share those facilities, but really having the dignity to have their own kitchen facility, their own bathroom. And in these projects that are permanent supportive housing, there's also typically either a live-in manager or other wraparound services that come with it, so that we can make sure that that person or that family is positioned for success when they get into that situation and have that roof over their head. So really, when we're subsidizing units, we really want to create units that have that, extra level of kind of amenity, where it's not just a bedroom, it's that they actually have their own kitchen and bathroom facilities and don't necessarily have to share that with others.
Hi, my name is Wahaya Wolfpaw. I am a female two-spirit indigenous grandmother. I am a part of reintegration. I've been volunteering like 8 years. I'm a part of Mothers Out Front fighting the gas leaks. I'm a part of Indigenous Peoples Network, and I'm part of Global Village, which is an organic farm. So my question, I help homeless come over to the farm. So my question is, what about Queen Street? You want to know where the homeless is. What is being done about that shelter that lost a body for 2 weeks, that the homeless will not go into, especially the women? So what is being done about that? Because that's the main leak for these homeless. And with Epica, we met with you, Ed, we met with Maddie Cassell, because we had something in place for the people that are in the grips of addiction called Epica House, ex-prisoners organizing for community advancement. /jobs.jails. We got free phone calls for the kids to talk to their parents. We got the threshold up. We passed bills for this city. So I would like to know, why is Queen Street still there? I wouldn't send any, they're mostly suburban girls that go in there. 90% men. It's a wet shelter, which means they can drink. I did this protecting myself. So that's my question. These people are homeless, the ones that are in the grips, but you don't talk about the gray areas. Like, you bring the housing up, they cannot, this is a vet right here. He is from the Crow Reservation, Michael's from the Cheyenne, and I'm from Cherokee Nation. So my question is, there's the gray areas, no one can pass the credit checks. His is just credit check. He's a vet. Credit checks, that's what people don't think about. I had to spend $400 to get out of homelessness on just the credit checks a month. So this is the gray areas you guys don't talk about. Sure, you're gonna bring all this stuff in, but guys like him can't find housing, and that's a shame. A vet. It's 20 years military life. Believe me, you don't know what they go through in military life. So for them to come home and be thrown away, that's wrong. So that's who I fight for too. I'm on the median with them on 4th of July as they're begging for money. My grandson just aged out of DCF. They broke tribal law, and my daughter couldn't find housing. She couldn't find housing because of no credit checks, because of background checks. But this is the main, we speak on the gray areas, there's a lot. So, and you said maybe the landlord will, maybe. We can't take maybes because they're getting ready to do a protest in front of City Hall tonight, a sleep out. So we're done, I speak with DCF, I speak on DCF by throwing out the truth. How are these parents gonna get back to their kids when you don't offer anything sober in this town? You don't offer no jobs? They can't get jobs. Anyone that's been in a week of prison, even that, they can't get jobs. So this is who I speak for right here, the military vet. So what about Queen Street? That's what I wanna know.
Who wants to answer that? Specific question about the Queen Street shelter. What shelters? Credit checks. I don't know that you could speak to jobs and vets.
So, hello. So I'm not sure I can speak to these are complex issues, absolutely. And there's multiple convergent issues that they all coalesce. Homelessness seems to be a thread that ties into so many other related issues. What I can speak to you of is Queen Street is definitely a resource that everybody's aware of. You may be aware that additional capacity was provided this winter at the former RMV site in order to try to alleviate some of the strain on that one facility. In addition to that, I think I heard mention one of the members of the family here is a veteran. There's actually quite a few services that are available for veterans that I'm not sure how familiar you are with that, but if you'd like to, I can maybe take your information and share some information for me with you afterwards. We can maybe see if we can get you connected with some of the veterans groups that provide some of those services.
When I was homeless for 8 years, the guy only gave me somewhere to live because I sued a slumlord because I was native. That's it.
Thank
8
you.
years I was homeless for, and I don't do drugs or drink. I went through a divorce.
Thank you for sharing your concerns with us.
Hi, my name is Mike, and I appreciate you organizing all these events. Okay, I appreciate you organizing these events, and I have some ideas on the question. So, we cannot solve the housing issue only by getting funds from government and other places. We also need to strengthen the family and the education. So, I've been in situations that people weren't able to afford, but they were living 2 or 3 generations together in the same house in order to afford. And then if you don't know how to save, then you will never achieve your goals. So we came here about 30 years ago, and the minimum wage was way below $5 an hour. And then we were able to buy a house, brand new house, for $150,000. And now you're telling me the affordability is $200,000. And now the minimum wage is $15 an hour, which doesn't make sense to me. Why is that low? Based on only simple calculations, it should be at least over $300,000, the affordability of the housing. Yeah, my question is, how do you get to $200,000 for a brand new housing unit? You say you need $500,000 to build it, and then the affordability is $200,000. 30 years ago, we found not a brand new house for $200,000, and we say it's not for us, we cannot afford it. And we were paid like $5 an hour. Now it's 15. And And then maybe if you live 2 or 3 generations together, you'll be able to get a fresh start and then later on. So how did you get to $200,000 for that affordability?
Thank you very much for your question. I actually heard a couple of different things. The first question is around the average sale price for a Habitat home, which I had mentioned is approximately $200,000. And the way that we get to that is our Habitat affiliate accepts applicants who make somewhere between 30 and 60% of the area median income. So that is a figure that is reported by the federal government for folks making, what their income is in relation to other people within the state of Massachusetts. When Habitat accepts an applicant family, we work with that family and they do 300 hours with us prior to purchasing their home. And part of that 300 hours is education. And so they take classes on first-time home ownership, and they take classes on financing and budgeting and credit repair. And in addition to that, they spend time working on their home. And so they get to see what it takes to build a home and what the secrets are behind the walls, which makes them better able to maintain their home long term. When we come to the tail end of the process and they've put in all of those hours and they're now going to purchase their home, we look at the income of the family at the time. And we set the sale price for the home based on no more than 30% of the income that they're making. So we meet the family where they are and create a mortgage that meets the income that they have so that they are not cost burdened moving into the home. And at this point, if a family makes between 30 and 60% of the area median income in Worcester County for a 30-year mortgage, that calculates out to about $200,000.
Thank you. There's a question over here. Okay, after you.
Oh, okay. All right. I'm Terry Kelly. I'm from Worcester. Yes. The year 2012, I addressed the city council, and I asked them. We had Katrina that hit the country. 70 people died December 25th, 2012. And I was looking at Worcester, and I was like, shoot, we had a tornado in 1953. It lasted an hour and 18 minutes. 105 people died, 1,288 injuries, and it was $193 million in damage, okay? I asked the city council for a permanent shelter and community center in every district that had a soup kitchen, an educational center, because when kids turn 18, their parents are kicking them out the door because they're adult now. A section for drug addiction, so they can concentrate on their addiction, and 3 floors, men, women, and families, with a rental hall that teaches people how to do a trade, to better themselves, to give them employment. My question is, why you guys never considered it, and Augustus, you were a city manager at the time, no consideration, and we don't have these resources. Now we had COVID, where did we put the sick people? DCU? In schools? In gymnasiums where our kids go? That's inappropriate. I want them to consider it. There's permanent shelters and community centers in every district. And you could show the heart of Worcester, and maybe this will go across the country, and everybody will have these resources. If a person is in that district and a tree hits their house, they can go to that place. Okay?
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm not done. You can go to Queen Street. I ask any of you, go to Queen Street and stay there for a week. okay? Stay for a week, okay? Stay in a room that's shaped like a T with no windows, no doors, just one door in, one door out. The hallways, I've been told all this. The hallways, they put mats on the floor. Now you got people in wheelchairs, how are they gonna get out during a fire? And one shower for all these women, one shower for all these men?
Is there a question the panel could answer?
These are bad living conditions for anybody. And you got staff people that are homeless that treat the homeless bad. Even the director was no good, okay? Stealing is crazy there for people. I am asking to reconsider the permanent shelter and community center in every district, and it would be for everybody. And this community center, permanent shelter would help anybody. Like if we had a tornado tomorrow, we would be set. I asked for this in 2012 and I was ignored, okay? Now, since then, we have had COVID. Now, if that was put in play in 2012, we would have been all set with COVID, and we would have never put a patient with COVID in a school. Now,
I'm going to ask the panel to consider the... Okay.
Make it happen.
So I'm going to ask the panel to consider the conditions at Queen Street and the presence of community centers in our city. I'm sorry, ma'am, but we need to let some other people speak.
Why can't you put the $30 million into this permanent shelter community center in every district?
Who would like to respond?
Massachusetts how to do it
Thank you.
in the whole country. Worcester has the heart.
I'll leave to Peter to answer the various programs the city has set up. But I think Peter alluded earlier. The goal around ending the homelessness issue is to create homes. And particularly, we know a lot of folks really would benefit from the supportive housing. So not only the unit, but the support services that allow them to stay permanently rehoused. And we have done that. We've tried to prioritize that. We just recently, a couple months ago, opened on Lewis Street. 24 units run by the Worcester Housing Authority, where there's a live-in case manager who supports the 24 previously chronically homeless individuals who live there in exactly the kind of unit that Peter talked about, with their own kitchenette, their own bathroom, with their own room, and the supports that they need. That really is the best practice. We know that is the most successful way to rehouse and keep folks rehoused. At the same time, we are trying to build more housing because shelter should be rare and brief and non-reoccurring. Shelter isn't the ultimate goal, the ultimate destination. It should be a place to help people when they're in tough times, but then quickly move them to a more appropriate, stable place long term, and that's the goal.
Thank you.
He didn't get what I just said. He really didn't.
I understand that.
Can I say something else?
No, other people have questions as well. Thank you.
My name is Linda Long-Baleel, and I'm actually from Holden, where I'm running for select board, and I support the META Communities Law, just in case anyone's wondering. And my question is, we're hearing rumors that if towns don't comply with the MBTA Communities Law, that we may get our Chapter 70 funding pulled. And also I'd like to know if there's someone, Secretary Augustus, on your staff I could talk to about some technical questions I have. So,
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for the question. Thank you for your support of the MBTA communities. Chapter 70 wouldn't be in jeopardy. That's a formula grant program that is based on the number of students in the school district, et cetera. So that wouldn't be, it's the discretionary grants that the state gives that are subject to being withheld from communities that are non-compliant with the law. So things like the MassWorks program, the Housing Works program. I think there's 13 different programs, and we are looking to expand the number of programs that will be ineligible to non-compliant communities. And as you saw in Milton, the Attorney General has sued the town of Milton for their non-compliance, and that'll move its way through the Supreme Judicial Court, and we'll see what the consequences of that are. But we do have a number of folks who work in our office who really try to guide communities as they set up the zoning necessary to be compliant with the MBTA Communities Act. We just gave a grant to the town of Holden to help them with compliance. We've given about $6 million of grants to cities and towns to help with compliance. So we're hopeful that Holden will see the light and do what everybody else is doing, which is comply with the law and create the zoning necessary. But why don't you grab me after, and we'll give you the contact information.
Thank you. I do note the time as after 2, and I don't want to extend too much of your time beyond this for the speaker, so I just have to ask the panelists if you're willing to answer 1 or 2 more questions, or if you need to move on to something else. Okay, all right. So, 1, 2, okay.
Could, Ed, can you and Peter kind of identify from a zoning perspective how you guys can use that specific issue both from a state-supported level and from a local level, and do some of these creative projects, how you work together with that zoning issue from state to local?
Sure. I think one is an element that's included in the Affordable Homes Act, which is making as of right the ability to create accessory dwelling units. Worcester is ahead of the game because they've already taken that step, but so many communities really fight that and block that, and we know there's a lot of opportunities to create a number of units that can not only be beneficial to the folks who move into those units, but beneficial to the property owners, because in some cases it's a way to get some additional income that allow you to pay your taxes and your insurance bill and the other things that you may be challenged to pay for. And then the MBTA Community Act, as we've been talking about, that really requires those 177 communities that are in the footprint of the MBTA Communities Act to create significant land area zones within proximity to public transportation, areas that you can build multi-family dense housing, which is what we really need. You cannot put age restrictions. A lot of communities, will say, well, we'll do housing, but we'll do it just for seniors. Yes, we need housing for seniors, but we also need housing for families. And often there's a little kind of bias against families because communities sometimes think, as I mentioned earlier, that kids mean more schools, and more schools means more taxes, and that becomes kind of a barrier. And so we're trying to take those barriers down through the MBTA Communities Act.
I think one thing that's important to understand too is that the state has the Zoning Act, so communities' ability to have local control and do things with zoning in their communities is based on what's allowed for at the state level in the Zoning Act. And so that's why when the state comes in and starts to influence things like MBTA communities or some of the elements that are in the Affordable Homes Act, that's really helpful, because sometimes, as we've seen, local communities, I think, wield that zoning tool in a way that's not actually helpful to the Commonwealth as a whole. We know even in the city of Worcester, some of the elements of our zoning ordinance, like I said earlier, dates back to the 1960s, and that's true of a lot of towns, and quite frankly, the whole nation was in a different place in the 60s, and so sometimes it can be an uncomfortable conversation, but if you look at our Worcester Now Next plan, there's a lot of commentary and sort of correlation between zoning and segregation of class and race, and so it's really important that communities take responsibility for that and start to allow multifamily zoning by right in those communities, because what they've created is an environment of exclusion where unless you have a certain level of income, then you really can't have an opportunity to be in that community. And so that's really what needs to be looked at.
Thank you. There's a woman here that...
My name is Angie Bellata. I'm a resident here in the city of Worcester. I think you just actually addressed my question partially. But, I believe that democracy is a participatory process. And so two of you, one is working for the state, one is working for the city, there's a couple nonprofits represented. And it's very easy, I think, for people to, I do have a question, sorry, I'm just wanting to make this statement, but I think it's very easy to want, for many people to kind of want to say, what the heck? What are you doing? We're paying you, or you're working for this, what's happening? And what I think you illustrated fairly well today are the complexities, deep complexities, that do not just lie with our community or even the state, but at the federal level. So there happens to be a protest tonight and a rally tonight with a lot of homeless people and people who support them, including myself. And I just am wondering, what can I bring to them tonight to say, how can they, I don't know, what data can I bring to them tonight that will be most beneficial? Or I might not be able to give them answers, but their biggest question is going to be, why is there so many $1 billion that has come through the state, and we're on the street, and we're trying, and we can't, and we don't really want to go to these other shelters because we feel that it's in danger. I understand my question is complex, but is there, again, in the spirit of participatory democracy, is there anything that you can empower me with, any facts, or something I can even do offline after this meeting, so that when I'm talking to people today, I can, I don't know, give them some hope and explain to them that it's not all the government hating on them and, not all the government wanting them to just be homeless. So, because I don't believe that all people in government positions want that at all. So, thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Sure, it's a good question, and I think sometimes it's hard to figure out, the appropriate channels to communicate all that it is that we're doing. And so our main method of communication in terms of giving updates to the council and the community on what's happening, what programs, initiatives that we have going on, whether it's public policy or resources, is through our communications as an administration to the city council on the city council agendas. So the timing is very interesting because as of Friday at 6 p.m., we submitted to the city council the latest update as it relates to housing and neighborhood development activities. You can see the housing strategy that I described and the pipeline, both recently completed rentals, recently completed homeownership opportunities, the pipeline that's forthcoming in terms of not only affordable housing, but the permanent supportive housing as well with the wraparound services. So if you go on the city's website and look at the agenda for this coming Tuesday, you'll see that on the agenda, and it's a very comprehensive report that'll give you some of the data that you're looking for. Off the top of my head, I know right now we have about 600 affordable rentals in the pipeline that are either at some stage of development, whether it's they are still working on financing or they might be actively under construction coming online in the next 12 months or so. But we have about 600 actively in the pipeline right now. One of the challenges is that because of the subsidies required to basically bring down the cost of constructing these affordable units, it takes a long time. It takes a lot, it's a lot faster for a market rate project to come online because they just get a typical bank loan and then go and, get under construction. But in order to work through the government programs and often stitching together multiple sources, sometimes we'll have a project that has 10 sources of capital, and trying to get 10 of those applications in, 10 approvals, stitch that together into one closing, it can take 2 to 3 years to put all that together just to get the project with the shovel in the ground. So that's a frustration that I know the secretary has been trying to work on too, is like, how do we get these units built faster? Because right now the traditional approach to affordable housing has just taken a long time to get them online. And then the other piece too, aside from the affordable units in the pipeline, the permanent supportive housing that we described with the wraparound services and really the deepest level, so trying to get folks out of homelessness and not relying on shelters, but getting them into more stable situations. We have over 100 units of that in the pipeline right now. A big piece being the Oriole Drive project. Worcester Community Housing Resources is about to get under construction with 90 units there. But we have about, I'd say, probably close to 40 others throughout different projects, also at some stage of development. And all of those are going to build upon what the secretary mentioned with the Worcester Housing Authority, the 38 Lewis Street. We brought 24 units online this past fall, but have many more of that coming soon. So it's not
critical scarcity, a critical supply problem, and I think there's been a lot of efforts put into putting these projects into the pipeline, but it just takes a little while for them to actually get those shovels in the ground and get those doors open for people to then move in.
Just one other piece I think is worth noting. The Lewis Street example is, I think, a good one. We put together a plan, Central Mass Housing worked on that plan, a lot of stakeholder groups. We started that plan in 2018. We just opened the doors 4 or 5 months ago. I can't tell you how many neighborhood meetings I went to, along with city councilors and others fighting neighbors who were worried about it, concerned about it, and trying to stop it and block it. That had to be sorted through in community meetings and community discussions. So nothing is ever easy, not only on the funding side, but the kind of community opposition side sometimes. And that's, I think, a place where people who care about these things can make a big difference, showing up and giving another side, another voice to the need for some of these things. And I had an occasion to go out to Oakham the other day, where Dismas House, who I've worked with for 25 years here in Worcester, that does prisoner reentry. So folks who come out of prison who often are very challenged to find homes. They go into their facilities. They have a couple in Worcester, get stabilized, get employment, and then transition back into productive roles in the community. In Oakham, they've created home ownership, new home opportunities out there. We were opening those. Those are things that take a long time and that are complicated, but by showing up and by giving voice to it, I think you can make progress. It's never as fast, and it's never a straight line. Sometimes it zigzags, sometimes you step back a step or two, but overall, if you keep at it, you can still make a difference. And I would say, as challenging as things are, if you think about it, Massachusetts is the only right to shelter state of the 50 states. We have the responsibility now, 7,500 families, 25,000 people, every day trying to figure out how to get them work authorizations, food, health care, all the things that they need, and bringing them in to being part of the fabric of our state, getting them jobs that are much needed. We have a workforce shortage in Massachusetts. This can be a great opportunity for our state if we get the work authorizations lined up, and a great opportunity for these folks. So if we spend less time fighting amongst ourselves and more time kind of fighting the problem, I think we can really make a big difference. But I appreciate the question.
One of the things that I really appreciate hearing from the panel is that showing up, and I appreciate everyone who showed up today. I'm very sorry, but it was one question per person, and so many people have questions. But at 2:25, we've been here almost an hour and a half, and there's no way we can solve all the problems in that time, but we've aired a lot of conversations, and I think the panel has heard a lot of very important concerns that are not going to be solved today. But I appreciate the question asking for some hope, and I appreciate just being here together is another sign of hope and a way of communicating our concerns about this issue. It's not going away tomorrow, and we're living with it. And it sounds like we all need to be working together to try and promote a variety of solutions to what is a very complex problem. So I'm going to say thank you to everyone, particularly to our panelists, and I thank all of you for coming today. And I appreciate the time that it takes to have all the questions answered, and I apologize for not letting everyone speak today, but I do have to respect the time of our panelists. So thank you so much for being here today. Thank you.